Hey everyone, so this is going to be a polymer clay rose tutorial, and let me start off by saying that I did watch a couple videos. I think one was by Funky Pink Gal, and then another one was by So Craftastic, I think is what it was called, or what her channel was called. Then there was one more, but I just can't think of the name of her username. So I kind of figured out my own little tricks and techniques that that I liked as far as making the roses. So I hope you can get some inspiration from this, and maybe it'll help you figure out your own little way on how you like to do your roses. So I kind of drew inspiration from a bunch of videos, is what I'm trying to say. So I guess we'll get started. Hope this isn't blurry. I kind of have the camera focused in, which I normally don't do, but the roses are small. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to get your clay and you want to roll it out. I did this before I started the video because if I did it while filming, then it would have been really shaky and that wouldn't have been good. So you want it pretty thin, about like that. And it's okay if it's not like perfect thickness throughout, because you will be changing, you'll see as I go through the tutorial that you will be changing the thickness when you're actually forming the petals. So I've seen people use a flower cookie cutter, like a 5-petal flower cookie cutter. And I've seen people use just their fingers to squish out, you know, roll little balls and squish out circles. And I've seen people just do regular circles, which is what I'm going to do on this tutorial, but I add to the circles a little bit, you'll see, to make the petals more realistic. So once you've got your clay rolled out pretty thin, just go ahead and get your circle cutter. And usually the magic number is 6 petals for my roses, but it kind of depends on how it goes when I'm making the rose. Sometimes I only use 3 petals, sometimes I use 9 or more petals. You know, it just depends on when I'm making the rose. If it looks great at 3 petals, then I'll stop. But if it doesn't look right, or it looks off, you know, where the center of the flower is not in the center, then I'll continue to add petals until I get it the way I like it to look, till I get it how I like it. So but usually 6 is the magic number, 5 or 6. So I've only got enough room to do 5 here, but that's okay. So once you've got your petals cut out, I think this is just an inch circle cutter. Let's see if I can get my ruler. Okay, this one's like 3/4 of an inch, and then I also use one that's 1 1/4 inches. Alright, so once you've got your circles cut out, what you want to do, because like this, they don't look like petals, they just look like circles. It doesn't matter how much you wind them around, you know, they're still going to look like circles just wrapped up. So what I do is I start with one, and on half of the circle, I just press down like this. So I don't worry about the bottom, because you're going to end up cutting this part off anyways at the end. So you can see all my finger indents. So what you can do, or what I do, and I do this for 2 reasons. After I've flattened it on one side, on half of the circle, then I flip it over and I flatten the same side. And the reason why I do this is, for one, to get rid of the fingerprints, because most of the time my clay is stiff, so it'll leave really deep finger circles. You'll see what I'm talking about. And then the other reason is you can tell if you haven't flattened both sides, because one side of the petal will look perfectly straight and then the other will have texture. So so there's two purposes to flattening both sides of the petal. You know, when you flatten one side and you flip it over and flatten that same side again, just on the other side of the petal. And it's to get rid of the fingerprints and also to make sure both sides of the petal has dimension. It doesn't look so precise. So you just want to do that for all your circles. You do not want it to look perfect at the least, because, you know, flowers aren't perfect. And this part isn't hard, it's just really boring. So I usually roll out as large of a strip of clay as I can and then cut out as many petals as I can. And then make as many flowers as I can with those petals. Alright, so once you've gotten all of your petals flattened on one side, I like to let them just sit for a second to cool down, because I've found that when you try and start your flower, when you try and roll the first petal on your rose, the centers will often become squashed and not look as beautiful as on a real rose, because the clay is so warm and soft that it just doesn't want to hold its shape for you. So I recommend just setting them off to the side for a second and maybe working on something else, or start on another flower that you had just made the petals for, which is what I've done. These are slightly bigger for the tutorial. So what you want to do, you just want to take one end and start rolling it. I didn't quite get that center as tight as I want it to be. You want the center to be tight. And make sure you focus on the part of the petal that you flattened out to make it look less neat. You want to make sure you're focusing on that when you're rolling your petals, because you want those to be on the top, not the bottom. So once you've gotten that first roll like this, then you want to take your finger and just pull down on the edge of the petal to get them to fold down. And the clay is actually pretty tough, so don't worry about breaking your petal, as long as you're not working with it when it's super soft, you know, right after you've just gotten done conditioning it. It'll hold its shape perfectly, and you'll end up with this as the start. So then you want to take your next one, and a lot of people say you want to start at the same height as this petal, but I like to start up, because you're going to be folding this top part down. So I like to start, try and give you measurements here. I like to start probably 1/4 of an inch higher on each petal from what you've just rolled. So it's going to look like that, and I'm kind of starting off where the last petal ended on this first one. I'm going to start right there. And just roll it. And then once again, you just want to take your thumb and pull down on the edges. Take your next petal Start where you ended on the last petal. And roll it. And you want to, each petal you put on, you want to do about 1/4 of an inch higher than the last petal. Sometimes you need to just press down underneath here to get it to stick to the other petals, and then roll the top down with your thumb. And do your next petal. Start 1/4 of an inch higher from the rest of the petals. Roll it over. Fold it down with your thumb. And when you're getting towards these last petals, you can use your pointer finger as support when you're rolling it down with your thumb. And especially if you're working with the clay that's not quite as stiff as this clay is, you want to use your pointer finger as support. And just keep putting on the petals until you are satisfied with the fullness of the rose. Okay, so obviously my rose is done at this point. So a lot of people, what they do is they just cut at this point. They just cut it off right here. But what I didn't like about that is it just looked like a cylinder. You know, there was no curve underneath the flower, and that's what you want. Flowers have a curve underneath it. So my technique is you want to just start pinching, and you want to be very careful. You need to do this slowly, because if you rush it, then you're totally gonna contort your flower all out of shape, and then it's gonna be ruined. So you just want to do this slowly, pinching at the base until you start making a little bit of headway, so you can see how it's getting thinner here. And you just want to keep pinching. And this is making the curve underneath the rose to make it look more realistic. And then once you've got it to a narrow enough state, then you can go ahead and just roll it in between your thumb and pointer finger. But don't try and roll it from the start, because then you're just gonna screw it up. You're gonna mess all the petals up. So start by pinching it at the base very slowly, going all the way around, pinching, and then you can roll once it gets thin enough. When I first started doing this technique, I just rolled and rolled until the flower eventually popped off. But what I realized is that if you roll until the flower comes off, then you're not going to have a flat base, a small flat base. And the reason why you need a very small flat base at the very bottom is because you need to have the flower sitting upright so that you can cook it. Because if it's leaned over, then the flowers are going to cook, or the petals are going to cook at a weird shape, because, you know, it's laying on its side. It's not pointing straight up. You don't want it laying on its side. You want it like that. So once you've gotten the flower at a narrow enough base like this, it's probably about 1/4 of an inch. That's when I go in with my knife and just cut it off. And then you have your finished rose. Now, if you want to add a leaf, which I don't normally do, I prefer them without the leaves. This is how I do it, and it's a little bit tricky because the petals tend to be a little bit delicate. But if you're careful enough, you can get the leaf on there. And the leaf mold that I'm using, what is it called? It's called Macon's Clay Leaves. Yeah, that's what the mold is called. And what I realized with this mold is, because the mold is so shallow, what you want to do is when you press the clay in there, just set it aside for 5 minutes or pop it in the freezer for a minute to let it cool, because if you try and pull the leaf out right after you've molded the clay into it, it's just gonna rip on you. So once you've got your leaf, I end up cutting a little under half of the base off. And then I find the side that I want the leaf on. Be very careful you're not pressing on the top, otherwise you're gonna squish the center. So once you've gotten the leaf fairly attached, what you want to do next is either take some TLS or I know there's a Sculpey glue or bonding liquid bond or something like that, and you just want to pull the leaf back, trying to make sure the camera's not blurry. Squirt a little bit in there. And then fold your leaf back up. And then set it aside to let it cool. So basically this is what the finished product is. And I think they look really pretty. So I'm just going to do one more quickly so that you can see it again. This one will be without the leaf. Take your first petal, and remember you want the side that you squished to be on top and the side that looks perfect to be on bottom. You don't want that perfectness. So start your roll, make sure it's a tight roll. Hope things aren't too blurry for you. Pull down with your finger. Your thumb. Start your next petal where your last petal ended. Go 1/4 of an inch up. Wrap it around. Pull down on the end with your thumb. Just keep repeating. Once you start making these, I'm kind of going a little bit slower for the tutorial, but you'll be able to whip these roses out really fast. So once I've gotten the rose finished, I'm just going to try and adjust it a little bit. It's a little bit off. That petal folded on me. Start pinching at the base. Then a roll. Then cut. And there you go. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and if you have any questions, let me know. I think that's all the tips that I have for you as far as making the base and making the petals look a little bit more realistic. I'd love to see anybody's videos, and I'd love to see people who do their roses, if they've figured out little ways to do their roses different. That's always fun. So, thanks for watching.